You never expect your wedding day to feel like someone else is in charge of the script. But the moment I learned who my dad had secretly invited, I knew nothing about this day would go as planned. I was 30, living in Austin, working as a project manager for a tech startup. Organization was my entire identity. Color-coded calendars, neat to-do lists, backup plans for my backup plans. I wasn't the kind of person who left space for chaos, especially not at my own wedding. I had spent months balancing budgets, smoothing over family tension, and arranging every detail. My fiancé, Matt, was the opposite of me, laid back, calm, the kind of man who believed that things work out. That's part of why we worked. But even he looked worried when he saw my dad's smug grin during the rehearsal dinner. My dad, Frank, had always been the wild card in our family. A retired firefighter, big personality, the sort who loved being the center of attention. He'd been divorced from my mom since I was in high school, and every holiday had turned into a contest for who could make the bigger statement. If Mom brought a fancy bottle of wine, Dad rolled in with fireworks. If Mom gave me a thoughtful gift, Dad gave me a car I didn't need. That kind of competition. So when I saw that grin, I braced myself. He waited until after dessert, when most people were distracted. Then he leaned across the table and said, almost too casually, "I've arranged something special for tomorrow. You'll thank me later." I tried to get more out of him, but he waved me off like it was nothing. Matt raised an eyebrow at me, but I just mouthed, "Don't." It wasn't worth escalating with Dad that night. Still, I couldn't shake it. My stomach was tight as I went over the seating chart later in the hotel room. Every time I tried to run through the checklist, my mind returned to his words. My dad had a way of pulling stunts that he thought were memorable, but they usually left me humiliated or scrambling. I'd made it clear that this wedding was not his show. Yet here I was, wide awake at 2 a.m., realizing I might not have any control over what he had set in motion. The morning of the wedding, everything looked perfect on paper. Flowers arranged, music cued, bridesmaids lined up. But I knew Dad, and I knew I was about to find out what special meant to him. I should have felt the usual mix of nerves and excitement as I slipped into my dress, but instead, there was this gnawing sense of dread. My bridesmaids tried to distract me with chatter and jokes, but I kept glancing at the door, half expecting my dad to burst in with some grand announcement. He didn't, which almost made it worse. The silence left me imagining every possible stunt: fireworks, a marching band, or maybe a speech that would run longer than the vows. When it was time for the ceremony to begin, the planner ushered me to the side room where I'd wait for my walk down the aisle. That was when Dad finally appeared, looking far too pleased with himself. He cleared his throat, straightened his tie, and said, "Honey, I've got a surprise for you. Someone special is going to walk you down the aisle." I frowned, confused. "That's supposed to be you, Dad." He grinned wider. "It is, but you won't be alone. I invited someone who deserves to be part of this moment too." Then he stepped aside, and there she was, my ex, Amanda. For a second, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. Amanda and I had dated for nearly 4 years in my 20s. It had been serious, even messy toward the end. She was my first love, but the breakup was brutal, full of blame and silence. We hadn't spoken in almost 6 years, and now she was standing in the church hallway, clutching a bouquet of flowers, looking like she belonged here. I stammered out, "What are you doing here?" My voice cracked, and the bridesmaids froze behind me. Amanda's eyes darted between me and Dad. "He called me, said you'd want me here, said you regretted how things ended." My pulse thudded. I shot a glare at my father, who looked way too proud of himself. In his mind, this was some kind of healing gesture, the ultimate show of love and acceptance. But for me, it was like a grenade had been dropped on the one day that wasn't supposed to be about the past. "Dad," I said sharply, "this isn't." The music began to play. The coordinator poked her head in, whispering, "It's time." And just like that, I was forced to make a choice: cause a scene in front of 200 guests, or let my father's version of special play out in real time. The music swelled louder, echoing through the chapel doors. My chest tightened as the coordinator's hand hovered near the handle, ready to fling them open. Behind her, I could see the expectant faces of friends and family, all waiting for that picture-perfect moment. Meanwhile, I was standing there with my dad on one side and Amanda on the other, the air between us thick with confusion and old wounds. Matt had no idea. He was up front, probably smiling nervously, waiting to see me walk toward him. He thought the only surprise would be the dress I had guarded so carefully. And here I was, seconds away from blindsiding him with a ghost from my past. "Dad, this isn't okay," I hissed, but my words were swallowed by the organ. He leaned close, his voice low but firm. "Trust me. You'll see this is right. Closure, healing, it's what you need." That was the thing about my dad. He always believed he knew best. Even when it came to parts of my life he'd never understood. He'd struggled when I came out, and our relationship had carried that tension for years. This stunt wasn't about me. It was about him proving something to himself, to the audience, maybe even to Amanda. Amanda looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. "We don't have to do this," she muttered, almost too softly to hear. But there was no time to weigh options. The doors swung open, and every head turned. I swallowed hard, pasted on the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes, and stepped forward. Dad squeezed my arm, Amanda matched my stride, and suddenly I was walking down the aisle flanked by two people who represented entirely different eras of my life. The whisper started immediately, a ripple through the pews. I caught the wide-eyed look on my mom's face in the front row. My cousin mouthed, "What?" Matt's smile faltered the moment his gaze shifted from me to Amanda. Step by step, I felt the day I'd built unravel. And yet, I kept walking, because the alternative, stopping, turning back, felt impossible. By the time we reached the altar, I could feel the weight of 200 questions pressing down, and none of them had answers I was ready to give. When Dad handed me off to Matt, his grin said he thought he'd given me a gift. But the look on Matt's face told me I might have just lost more than my composure. Matt didn't let go of my hands right away. He leaned in, whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "What's going on?" His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. I forced a small smile, praying he'd hold it together until we could get through the ceremony. "I'll explain later," I whispered back. The officiant cleared his throat and began, but I barely registered the words. My mind kept circling the same questions. Why had Amanda agreed to come? Why had my dad thought this was appropriate? And how many people in the pews were already speculating about what they'd just seen? I could almost feel the heat of their stares on my back. Amanda slipped into the first row, sitting uncomfortably close to my mom, who looked like she might combust. I tried to steady my breathing, focusing on Matt, but my thoughts kept snagging on the past. Amanda and I had built a life together once. An apartment full of thrift store furniture, shared playlists, road trips that ended in fights but started with laughter. We had loved fiercely, and broken apart even more fiercely. And now she was here, invited by the one man who loved drama more than anything else. The vows came, and I stumbled over mine. My voice wavered, and I saw Matt's brow crease. He knew me well enough to notice when I wasn't myself, and this was as far from myself as I'd ever felt. When he spoke his vows, though, his voice was steady, strong, a grounding presence that reminded me why I was here. For a fleeting moment, I managed to tune out the chaos and see only him. We sealed it with a kiss, applause filling the room, but even that felt different, lighter from some, hesitant from others. Dad was clapping the loudest, like he'd orchestrated the perfect show. Amanda avoided my eyes, staring at her lap. As we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Matt leaned close again. "We need to talk. Now!" The reception loomed ahead, but I knew before we even reached the doors that the real storm wasn't behind us. It was about to begin. The reception hall was buzzing, but it wasn't the happy kind of energy I'd pictured during all those months of planning. Conversations dipped when we entered, and more than one set of eyes darted toward Amanda, who lingered by the entrance like she wasn't sure if she should stay or bolt. My dad, meanwhile, was making his rounds, chest puffed, taking credit for what he clearly believed was his masterstroke. Matt kept a steady smile for the guests, but his hand on mine was rigid. As soon as we slipped behind the sweetheart table, he leaned in, voice low. "You need to tell me what that was. Why was she here?" "She wasn't supposed to be," I whispered. Dad invited her. I didn't know until right before the ceremony. Matt exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Unbelievable. He wasn't angry in the explosive way I'd feared, but the disappointment was worse. He turned his attention back to the clinking glasses and cheerful toasts, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. Dinner dragged on. I picked at the food, barely tasting it, while guests alternated between trying to act normal and sneaking curious glances. Amanda hadn't left. She sat at a back table, half listening to conversations, occasionally fiddling with her phone. Every so often, her eyes flicked toward me, then dropped again. When it came time for speeches, my dad insisted on going first. He launched into a story about my childhood, slipped in a few jokes, then pivoted back to his surprise. He talked about how love takes many forms, how the people who shape us deserve to be honored. His voice swelled like he was delivering a sermon, and by the end, half the room was clapping politely while the other half just looked confused. I felt my cheeks burn. This was supposed to be about me and Matt, our new chapter, not a tangled reunion stage for applause. When Dad finally sat down, Matt gave me a look that said it all. He was done tolerating this circus. I realized then that I had two choices. I could let my dad keep steering the night, or I could take it back, risking confrontation, maybe even spectacle, but reclaiming the day as mine. The DJ called for the first dance, and as Matt pulled me close, I knew the decision couldn't wait much longer. As the first notes of our song played, Matt held me close, his voice barely audible above the music. "You've got to set this straight," he said. "If you don't, he'll keep running the show." He was right. My dad had a way of hijacking moments and making them about him, and I'd spent most of my adult life smoothing it over. But this wasn't just a birthday or a holiday dinner. This was my wedding. I couldn't keep pretending it didn't matter. The song ended, guests applauded, and before the DJ could move on, I tapped the microphone. My voice wobbled at first, but I steadied it. "Thank you all for being here. This day means everything to us. But I need to make something clear." The room quieted. My dad's grin froze in place. Amanda straightened in her seat. "This is our wedding," I continued, glancing at Matt. "It's about the life we're building together, not the past." I didn't invite Amanda, my dad did. And while I respect the role people have played in my journey, today is not the time to reopen old chapters. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked relieved, others just curious, but Matt squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you. My dad shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting me to call him out so openly. Amanda gave me a small nod from across the room. It wasn't angry or offended, more like she understood. Then she stood, quietly gathered her things, and slipped out before anyone could stop her. The rest of the night wobbled between awkward and celebratory. The DJ did his best to reset the mood, and the dance floor eventually filled. But there was no shaking the tension, no ignoring the ripple effect of that one stunt. By the time Matt and I finally left the reception, I was exhausted, not from the schedule or the dancing, but from carrying the weight of other people's expectations. And though I'd made my stance clear, I knew the fallout from Dad's surprise wasn't finished. As we drove away, Matt reached for my hand. "We'll talk about this tomorrow. But for now, just us, okay?" I nodded, staring out the window at the city lights, wondering if I'd done enough, or if the damage was only just beginning. The next morning, the first thing I felt wasn't joy or relief, it was dread. I woke up in the hotel suite beside Matt, the wedding dress still draped over a chair, and the weight of yesterday pressed down like a second blanket. Matt was already awake, scrolling on his phone. Without looking at me, he said, "It's everywhere." Confused, I sat up. "What do you mean?" He handed me his phone. A cousin had posted a photo of me walking down the aisle, with Amanda at my side. The caption wasn't malicious, but the comments had started. "Wait, isn't that her ex?" Bold choice. "That's different." The post had already been shared, reshared, dissected. I felt my stomach twist. This isn't what people should be talking about. Matt finally looked at me, his eyes tired. "It's not just about people talking. It's about trust. You kept walking. You let it happen. I didn't have a choice." I said quickly, "It was either walk or cause a scene in front of everyone." "I get that," he admitted, "but it still felt like you chose him, your dad, over us." That stung because it wasn't completely wrong. My dad had been steering moments my whole life, and I had learned to bend rather than break. But now, married less than 24 hours, I saw how bending had cost me. I texted Amanda, a simple message. I'm sorry for how that played out. I didn't ask for it, she replied minutes later. I know. I wasn't sure why he called, but I thought maybe you wanted me there. I won't complicate things more. Her words should have given me closure, but instead, they highlighted how easily Dad had manipulated both of us. This wasn't about Amanda, it was about his need to control. When we finally packed our bags and headed to brunch with the family, I knew it couldn't just be another polite meal. I had to confront him, not with vague hints or half-pleasantries, but with the truth I'd been dodging for years. The question was whether Dad was ready to hear it, or whether calling him out would be the final wedge between us. Brunch was held at the hotel's restaurant, the kind with big windows and too many mirrors. By the time Matt and I arrived, most of my family was already seated. My mom gave me a tight smile, clearly holding back her own commentary. Dad, on the other hand, looked relaxed, chatting loudly with my uncle, waving at us like nothing unusual had happened. I slid into a chair across from him, Matt beside me. I didn't waste time. Dad, we need to talk about yesterday. He raised his eyebrows, feigning innocence. What's there to talk about? It was beautiful. You had both sides of your life represented. People will remember it forever. I clenched my jaw. That's not what I wanted. That wasn't your decision to make. For the first time, his smile faltered. I was helping. You've never been good at facing the past, so I gave you the chance. One day, you'll thank me. No, I said firmly. I won't. You didn't give me a chance, you took one. You stole my moment and made it about your idea of closure. You didn't think about what it meant for me, for Matt, or even for Amanda. The table went quiet. Forks hovered in midair. My uncle stared into his coffee like it might swallow him whole. Dad leaned back, his voice lowering. You're overreacting. You embarrassed yourself with that speech. If you'd just gone along with it, people would have admired your maturity. Matt finally spoke, calm but steady. With respect, Frank, what people admired yesterday was her courage to set a boundary you ignored. That wasn't maturity on your part, it was selfish. Hearing Matt defend me felt like a lifeline. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't used to being called out, especially not in front of family. I took a breath. I love you, but I can't keep letting you dictate my life. If you want to be part of it, you need to respect that I make my own choices now. Yesterday crossed a line. Silence hung over the table. My mom gave me the smallest nod, like she'd been waiting years for me to say it. My dad just stared, finally looking less like the man in control and more like someone who didn't know his next move. It was the first time I realized he might not change, and the first time I understood I had to anyway. After brunch, Matt and I walked back to the car in silence. My hands were trembling, not from anger anymore, but from release. For years, I'd rehearsed versions of that confrontation in my head, and now it was finally done. The words weren't perfect, but they were mine. Matt unlocked the car, then paused. I'm proud of you, he said. Simple words, but they landed with a weight I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd let my dad's voice overpower mine. Hearing Matt acknowledge that I had finally pushed back felt like proof I was moving in the right direction. The rest of the day blurred into travel and small talk, but my phone buzzed nonstop. Relatives messaged me with everything from sympathy to gossip. A cousin texted, "Good for you." He needed to hear that. Another wrote, "People are still talking about Amanda. Wild move by your dad." I ignored most of it. For once, I didn't want to manage anyone else's feelings. That night, as Matt and I settled into the quiet of our apartment, we unpacked the events in slow fragments. He admitted how blindsided he'd felt seeing Amanda. I admitted how trapped I'd felt, knowing if I resisted in the moment, my dad would have turned it into an even bigger scene. We both agreed that if we wanted our marriage to work, we couldn't let my dad keep pulling strings. Later, I got another text, this time from Amanda. "I hope you're okay. I know yesterday wasn't fair to you. For what it's worth, you handled it better than I would have." I stared at the message, unsure if replying would reopen something I didn't need. In the end, I just typed back, "Thanks. Take care of yourself." For the first time in years, I felt like Amanda was truly in the past. Not because of distance, but because I'd chosen to keep her there. Still, one thought lingered as I lay awake beside Matt. I had drawn a line with my dad, but would he respect it, or just find another way to test it? The answer came a week later, when my dad called. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its usual bravado. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I thought I was helping." I let him speak, but this time I didn't rush to smooth things over. I told him plainly how his choices had left me humiliated, how his need to control had bled into every milestone of my life. "You don't get to decide what's best for me anymore," I said. "If you want to be in my life, you have to respect that boundary." There was a long silence on the line. For once, he didn't argue. He just said, "I'll try." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the first time he'd acknowledged the need to change. Matt and I moved forward, shaky at first but stronger for having faced the storm together. We joked about how our wedding would be remembered, not for the flowers or the food, but for the spectacle my dad created. But underneath the humor was a sense of relief. We had survived the worst possible test on day one, and if nothing else, it forced us to start our marriage with absolute clarity about what we would and wouldn't tolerate. As for Amanda, she stayed true to her word and kept her distance. Whatever unfinished business we carried for years seemed to dissolve with that single, awkward walk down the aisle. In a strange way, my dad had been right about one thing. Closure did happen. It just wasn't the kind he had imagined. Looking back now, I don't see my wedding as ruined. It was messy, uncomfortable, and not at all what I planned, but it taught me something I couldn't have learned otherwise. Sometimes the biggest step into adulthood isn't saying, "I do," to someone you love. It's saying, "No more," to the patterns that kept you small. And though it took a stunt I never wanted, I walked out of that experience knowing that this time, the aisle really did lead somewhere new.